Last week, we reported the bombshell news that Robert Wagner has been named a person of interest in the death of his wife, legendary actress Natalie Wood.
She was Hollywood's golden girl, adored on screen, envied in life, and gone far too soon. But what really happened the night Natalie Wood vanished from a yacht in the dead of night? Her death was ruled an accident, but new testimonies, long-buried secrets, and chilling contradictions suggest otherwise. Was it a tragic misstep, or something far darker? This is the untold story of fear, fame, and a mystery that refuses to rest.
Chris Walken, you've made, in this last couple of years, these two enormously successful films. I happen to have seen you used to be a singer and dancer, didn't you?
I did. That's a long time ago. You must be old.
Natalie Wood's death has been the subject of speculation for over 4 decades. When she drowned in 1981 off the coast of California, the initial ruling was accidental death. But even then, questions began to surface. Questions about how a woman so terrified of deep water would end up in it late at night, alone, without a life jacket. In the years that followed, inconsistencies in witness statements, unexplained injuries, and delayed emergency responses only deepened the mystery. While many people accepted the official explanation at the time, others quietly wondered whether there was more to the story than what was reported. Natalie Wood was more than just a movie star. To the public, she represented the golden age of Hollywood, a child actress who had grown into a glamorous, successful adult performer. Her image was carefully managed, and she was often seen smiling at premieres, gracing magazine covers, and appearing in some of the most beloved films of her generation. But behind the polished public persona was a much more complicated life, shaped by pressure, personal fears, and a deeply controlling environment that started in early childhood. Born on July 20th, 1938 in San Francisco, Natalie Wood entered the world as Natalia Nikolaevna Zakharenko. Her parents, Maria and Nikolai, were Russian immigrants who had fled the political unrest of their homeland in search of a better life. But like many immigrant families of the time, they found themselves struggling to make ends meet in America. It was Maria, Natalie's mother, who became convinced that her daughter could be the key to lifting the family out of poverty. From as early as age 4, Natalie was pushed into acting. At first, she was cast in small roles, but her mother had bigger ambitions. She was determined to see Natalie become a Hollywood star. According to several biographies and family accounts, Maria's influence was intense and, at times, emotionally damaging. One example often cited is a moment on a film set when Natalie couldn't cry on cue. In response, Maria reportedly tore apart a butterfly in front of her daughter to provoke a genuine emotional reaction. It worked for the camera, but the emotional cost was high. Despite the difficult circumstances, Natalie showed an early talent for acting. She was more than just a photogenic child. She had a natural ability to convey complex emotions on screen. This made her stand out among the many young actors in the industry. Her big break came at just 8 years old, in the classic Christmas film Miracle on 34th Street. In it, she played a young girl who questions the existence of Santa Claus, a role that won over audiences and made her a household name. From that point forward, Natalie Wood was a fixture in American entertainment. She continued to land major roles throughout her teenage years, gradually transitioning from child star to serious actress. This transition was notoriously difficult in Hollywood, but Natalie managed it with performances that displayed both vulnerability and strength. One of her most celebrated early adult roles was in Rebel Without a Cause, where she starred opposite James Dean. Her portrayal of Judy, a teenager caught between emotional neglect and the search for love, earned her an Academy Award nomination at just 17. More success followed. She starred in West Side Story, playing Maria in the tragic musical Romance, and in Splendor in the Grass, where she tackled themes of heartbreak and mental illness. These performances further cemented her status as a leading actress of the era. But even as her career soared, Natalie continued to deal with private challenges, pressures from the industry, the legacy of her strict upbringing, and the ongoing effort to maintain an ideal public image. While her career seemed charmed, Natalie's personal life was filled with stress and scrutiny. Fame came with a cost. She was expected to maintain a spotless image, work long hours, and consistently deliver strong performances, all while navigating the complex social world of Hollywood. The control her mother had exerted in her childhood was eventually replaced by the expectations of studio executives, agents, and eventually, her partners. One figure who would become central in both her public and private life was actor Robert Wagner. Natalie met Wagner as a child, and by the time she was a teenager, she had told her mother she would marry him one day. That prediction came true. Natalie and Wagner married in 1957 when she was 19 and he was 27. Their relationship was widely celebrated as a Hollywood fairy tale. Two beautiful, successful actors in love. Their wedding received significant media coverage and fans followed their marriage closely. But as is often the case in celebrity relationships, the reality was far more complicated than the image projected to the public. Sources close to the couple have said that their marriage was marked by jealousy and control. Wagner, while successful in his own right, was sometimes seen as being overshadowed by Natalie's career. As her fame continued to rise, his career remained more modest. Some observers believe this dynamic contributed to underlying tension in their relationship. In 1962, after just 5 years of marriage, Natalie and Wagner divorced. The reasons for their split were never fully explained, but it was clear that both personal and professional stress played a role. Natalie went on to have other relationships, including a high-profile romance with Warren Beatty and a marriage to British producer Richard Gregson, with whom she had a daughter named Natasha. But that marriage also ended in divorce after Gregson was discovered to have had an affair. In a surprising turn of events, Natalie and Wagner reunited in the early 1970s. Both were single again, and by 1972, they remarried in a small ceremony aboard a yacht off the coast of Malibu. Their second marriage was more private than the first, and they later had a daughter together, Courtney. For a time, it appeared they had found a sense of stability. They blended their families and returned to the public eye as a reconciled couple. But some close friends and insiders have said that the same issues that troubled their first marriage began to resurface in the second. Throughout her life, Natalie had a deep, lingering fear of dark water. This wasn't a minor phobia, it was a well-known and deeply rooted fear. According to accounts from family and friends, this fear dated back to a moment in childhood when her mother told her that a psychic had predicted she would die by drowning. Whether or not Natalie believed the prophecy in a literal sense, the idea clearly stayed with her. She avoided open water and was never comfortable around boats. This detail became particularly significant in the wake of her death. Natalie drowned after going overboard from the yacht Splendor, which was anchored off Catalina Island. The conditions that night, choppy waters, darkness, and limited visibility, matched exactly the kind of situation she had long feared. Many people who knew her found it hard to believe that she would have willingly gone out alone in such conditions, especially after drinking alcohol. The question of how Natalie ended up in the water, given her well-known fear and her cautious nature, has never been fully answered. Some have suggested that she might have tried to secure the dinghy, believing it had come loose and was banging against the yacht. Others doubt she would have taken such a risk. The fact that her body was later found wearing a nightgown and socks, with bruises on her body, only added to the mystery. In the days and weeks following her death, the investigation moved quickly. Authorities concluded that her death was a tragic accident. The case was closed with minimal scrutiny, and the official narrative remained unchallenged for many years. But even early on, not everyone was convinced. The gaps in the timeline, the conflicting statements from those on board, and the physical evidence all left room for doubt. Natalie Wood's love life captured as much public attention as her film roles. Her relationships, particularly with actor Robert Wagner, were often portrayed as glamorous and romantic, the kind of love story people expected from Hollywood royalty. But those who knew Natalie more intimately often spoke of a different reality, one shaped by control, emotional conflict, and unresolved tension. Natalie met Robert Wagner when she was just 10 years old. She reportedly saw his picture in a magazine and told her mother that one day she would marry him. At the time, it sounded like an innocent childhood fantasy. Years later, that prediction came true. At the age of 18, she began dating Wagner, who was 8 years her senior and already a well-known actor. Their relationship quickly became serious, and by December 1957, they were married in a high-profile ceremony in Arizona. To the public, their union looked perfect. They were both young, attractive, and successful, a match made for the silver screen. Magazines and newspapers followed their every move, often describing them as one of Hollywood's golden couples. Behind the scenes, however, the marriage was more complicated. Although they shared a deep bond, it was also a relationship shaped by insecurity, jealousy, and the pressure of living under constant public scrutiny. During the early years of their marriage, Natalie's career began to outpace Wagner's. By the early 1960s, she had received multiple Academy Award nominations and was widely regarded as one of the most talented actresses of her generation. Wagner, on the other hand, had found steady work, mostly in television, but had not reached the same level of acclaim. Some people close to the couple believed this imbalance created tension. While Wagner was supportive in public, there were rumors that he struggled with Natalie's rising fame and the attention she received from other men. Whispers of control began to surface. Friends described Wagner as protective, sometimes overly so, and said that he could be possessive, particularly when it came to Natalie's male co-stars or friends. There were reports that he didn't always support her ambition to take on challenging or high-profile roles, preferring that she prioritize their home life and marriage. It's difficult to say with certainty how much of this was true and how much was speculation. But it's clear that Natalie often felt the need to balance her professional goals with the expectations placed on her by those around her. One story that has followed the couple for decades is the rumor that Natalie caught Wagner in a compromising situation with another man shortly before their first divorce. According to several sources, she walked in on an intimate moment between Wagner and another male guest at their home. In the conservative climate of early 1960s Hollywood, such a revelation would have been scandalous. Although the specifics of the incident remain unconfirmed, the couple did separate soon after. They divorced in April 1962. Natalie's life after the divorce was not any easier. Her romantic relationships were often intense and short-lived. One of the most talked about was her relationship with actor Warren Beatty. Their connection was passionate but turbulent, reportedly filled with jealousy, emotional arguments, and mutual exhaustion. Eventually, Natalie married British producer Richard Gregson in 1969, and the couple welcomed a daughter, Natasha, in 1970. That marriage also ended in disappointment. Natalie discovered that Gregson had been unfaithful, and they divorced shortly after. In early 1972, Natalie and Wagner reconnected. Both had gone through personal upheavals, and their reunion came as a surprise to many. Within months, they were back together, and by July of that year, they remarried in a small private ceremony held on a yacht. Unlike their first wedding, which had been a lavish affair, their second was low-key and intimate. For a time, it looked like they had found a way to put their past behind them. They blended their families, raised their daughters together, and presented a picture of renewed happiness. But some close to them noticed that familiar patterns had started to return. Wagner's protective nature had not faded, and there were reports that he still struggled with Natalie's desire to continue acting and working on her own terms. Natalie had spent most of her life under some form of control, from her mother in childhood to the studios in her youth, and now from the complex dynamics in her marriage. Despite this, she still longed for independence and the ability to take on meaningful roles. One of the most consistent and unsettling parts of Natalie's story is her lifelong fear of dark water. This fear was more than a personal phobia. It was something that defined how she viewed the world. According to her sister Lana and several friends, Natalie had been told by her mother during childhood that a psychic had predicted she would die by drowning. The prediction, whether believed or not, seemed to leave a lasting mark. Natalie avoided swimming in open water whenever possible and was visibly uncomfortable on boats. She never learned to swim confidently and often spoke about her fear of being near the ocean at night. This fear was well known among those closest to her, including her husband. It's one of the reasons why her death, drowning in the dark waters off Catalina Island, continues to raise questions. People who knew her say she would never have gone out alone in a dinghy, especially in rough conditions and after drinking. The idea that she simply slipped while trying to tie off the dinghy never quite made sense to them. Still outwardly, Natalie continued to live her life as a devoted wife and mother. She focused on raising her daughters and returned to acting selectively. In 1981, she was working on the science fiction film Brainstorm, alongside Christopher Walken. Around this time, she and Wagner planned a short weekend trip on their yacht, the Splendor, as a break from filming. Walken joined them, and the group set off for Catalina Island. It was meant to be a casual getaway, a chance to relax and enjoy the sea. Instead, it became the setting for one of Hollywood's most enduring tragedies. The public version of events was that Natalie had gone missing from the yacht sometime during the night. Her body was found floating in the water several hours later. Wagner said she had probably gone out to adjust the dinghy, lost her balance, and fallen in, but almost immediately doubts were raised. Why would someone so afraid of water venture out alone at night? Why didn't the group raise the alarm sooner? And why were there bruises on her body that didn't match a simple fall? Years later, Natalie's daughter, Natasha Gregson Wagner, would produce a documentary titled Natalie Wood: What Remains Behind. In it, she shares her own memories of her mother and tries to reconcile the loving man who raised her with the questions that still linger around Natalie's death. Natasha has spoken positively about Wagner, describing him as a supportive and caring father figure. Yet even she has admitted that understanding what happened that night is something she still struggles with. Wagner has always maintained his innocence. He has never been charged with a crime, and he has consistently denied any involvement in Natalie's death. However, in 2018, the Los Angeles County Sheriff's Department officially named him a person of interest in the case. Investigators have said that Wagner's account does not align with other statements, and that he has refused to participate in further interviews. Despite renewed media attention and calls for a formal reopening of the case, no charges have been filed. At the heart of the story is a woman who was celebrated publicly but often faced emotional isolation privately. Natalie Wood was someone who wanted to believe in love, who wanted her family to work, and who longed for personal and creative freedom. But the pressures around her, from childhood to the very end, made that difficult. Her fear of water, her troubled relationships, and the circumstances of her final hours all paint a picture of someone who may have felt far more vulnerable than the public ever knew. On the night of November 28, 1981, Natalie Wood died during what was supposed to be a quiet weekend getaway. She was 43 years old. Her body was discovered floating in the waters off Catalina Island, California, wearing a flannel nightgown, socks, and a down jacket. The official explanation at the time was that she accidentally slipped while trying to secure a dinghy tied to the yacht she was staying on. But from the very beginning, the details didn't quite fit. Natalie had joined her husband, Robert Wagner, her co-star Christopher Walken, and the yacht's captain, Dennis Davern, aboard a boat called the Splendor. They had anchored near the island while taking a break from the filming of Brainstorm, the movie Natalie and Walken were working on together. The plan was for a simple weekend away, but the combination of alcohol, interpersonal tension, and an unclear timeline would lead to one of the most controversial and unresolved deaths in Hollywood history. On the surface, it may have looked like just another evening among colleagues and friends, but later reports and testimonies painted a very different picture. According to restaurant staff and other witnesses, the group went ashore that night for dinner at Doug's Harbor Reef, a well-known local restaurant. Several people present that evening remembered the group drinking heavily. There were multiple bottles of champagne, cocktails, and wine. By the time they returned to the yacht, everyone was noticeably intoxicated. Dinner, by most accounts, was not entirely relaxed. Witnesses reported hearing raised voices and arguments, especially between Wagner and Walken. Their disagreements centered around Natalie's career. Walken reportedly encouraged her to continue pursuing work that challenged her and to take on projects that excited her. Wagner, however, was said to be upset by the suggestion. According to the people present, he wanted Natalie to step back from work and focus more on their family. This tension would carry over onto the yacht once they returned. Once back on board, the arguments escalated. Dennis Davern, the captain of the yacht, would later say that there was an atmosphere of conflict and discomfort. According to his statements, Wagner and Walken continued to argue, and Wagner appeared increasingly upset. Davern claimed that Wagner believed Walken's interest in Natalie might have gone beyond professional boundaries. While Walken has never confirmed this, Wagner did later admit in an interview that in a moment of anger, he smashed a wine bottle on the table. The reasons for the outburst remain unclear, but what happened next has never been fully explained. According to Wagner's original statement, Natalie went to bed sometime after the argument. Later, when he went to check on her, she was gone. The yacht's dinghy was also missing. Wagner said he believed Natalie had gone to untie or secure the dinghy and must have fallen into the water. It was cold, dark, and the sea was rough. He said it must have been a tragic accident. But Davern offered a different version of events. Years later, he stated publicly that Wagner knew Natalie was missing much earlier than originally claimed. Davern said Wagner told him not to turn on the yacht's searchlights, not to alert other boats, and not to contact the Coast Guard immediately. Davern believed this delay may have cost Natalie her life, and may also have given time for stories to be aligned before any authorities arrived. The timeline of events remains one of the most troubling aspects of the case. Official reports show that the Coast Guard was not called until around 3:30 a.m., more than 4 hours after anyone had last seen Natalie. The captain of the rescue boat that eventually recovered Natalie's body, Roger Smith, later confirmed that he was not contacted until 5:11 a.m. For a drowning victim in cold water, this is a massive delay. In those conditions, survival time is often measured in minutes, not hours. Adding to the confusion were testimonies from people on nearby boats. One of the most vocal witnesses was Marilyn Wayne, who was anchored with her partner John Payne near the Splendor that night. Marilyn has said she was woken up around midnight by the sound of a woman's voice crying out from the water. According to her, the voice was yelling, "Help me! Someone please help me! I'm drowning!" The cries lasted for several minutes. Then Marilyn said she heard a man's voice calmly say, "Okay, honey." And after that, the screaming stopped. Marilyn said she tried to report what she had heard both at the time and in the following days, but she was never called to testify, and her statements were largely dismissed or ignored by the initial investigators. Her story would later be one of several that challenged the official version of events. When Natalie's body was found, she was floating about a mile away from the yacht. The dinghy she supposedly left in was found nearby, beached. But interestingly, the lines that tied it to the Splendor were still attached. This suggested that Natalie may not have untied it at all. Forensic experts reviewing the case later pointed out that it would have been unlikely for someone as frightened of dark water as Natalie to climb into a dinghy alone in the middle of the night while intoxicated and in bad weather. Natalie's autopsy only raised more questions. Her blood alcohol level was 0.14%, well above the legal driving limit. She also had traces of a motion sickness medication and a painkiller in her system, both of which would have increased the effects of the alcohol and reduced coordination. But the most concerning detail was the presence of bruises on her body. She had injuries on her arms, legs, and face, as well as an abrasion on her left cheek. Some medical experts later argued that the bruises were not consistent with a simple fall. Instead, they suggested there may have been a struggle before she went into the water. Dr. Thomas Noguchi, the original coroner on the case, ruled her death an accidental drowning. But in 2012, the Los Angeles County Coroner's Office amended the death certificate to include undetermined factors as part of the cause of death. This change was based on a review of the physical evidence, witness statements, and inconsistencies in the timeline. Despite this, the case was not reopened for a formal investigation until much later. In 2018, nearly 4 decades after Natalie's death, the Los Angeles Sheriff's Department named Robert Wagner as a person of interest. Investigators publicly stated that Wagner's version of events did not match the accounts given by other witnesses. They also expressed concern over his refusal to cooperate with the investigation. Wagner declined interviews and would not respond to requests for questioning under oath. Even now, Wagner maintains that Natalie's death was a tragic accident. He has never been charged with any crime related to the incident. Christopher Walken, who was also present that night, has said very little over the years. In a rare interview, he once speculated that perhaps Natalie heard the dinghy banging against the yacht and went to fix it. But even he admitted that it didn't entirely make sense, given her fear of the water and her intoxicated state. There are still unanswered questions that continue to trouble both investigators and the public. Why was there a delay in contacting authorities? Why were screams reported by nearby witnesses not addressed or taken seriously at the time? Why did the physical evidence suggest possible foul play, yet no arrests or charges were made? And why, after all these years, has no one been able to offer a clear and consistent account of what happened between the time the group returned from dinner and the moment Natalie went missing? In many ways, Natalie Wood's death remains an open wound in the history of Hollywood. It is a case where public image, personal relationships, and legal process have collided, leaving a trail of conflicting stories and unresolved emotions. For some, the truth may never be fully known. But as new evidence and testimonies have come to light, it has become increasingly difficult to accept the original explanation without question. In the years since Natalie Wood's death, new information has come to light that has reframed the public's understanding of her life. Not just how she died, but how she lived and what she endured. For decades, she was seen as a symbol of Hollywood glamour. But behind the fame, Natalie's life was marked by personal trauma, secrets, and difficult relationships that began when she was still a child. The final chapter of her story includes allegations that not only deepen the mystery surrounding her death, but also raise serious questions about the culture of silence that once dominated the entertainment industry. In 2021, Natalie's younger sister, Lana Wood, published a memoir titled Little Sister: My Investigation into the Mysterious Death of Natalie Wood. In it, she made a disturbing revelation that Natalie had once confided in her that she had been sexually assaulted by Kirk Douglas, one of the most powerful and respected actors of his generation. According to Lana, the assault took place in the 1950s when Natalie was just 16 years old. At the time, Douglas was at the height of his career. He was a major box office star, known for films like Spartacus and Champion, and widely admired within the industry. According to Lana's account, their mother, Maria, had arranged for Natalie to meet Douglas in what was framed as a career opportunity, a chance to build relationships that could lead to more roles and greater exposure. Instead, Natalie came home that night deeply shaken. Lana said her sister was visibly distressed, her clothes disheveled and her voice trembling as she told her, "He hurt me." Natalie reportedly told very few people about what happened. Like many women of that era, she kept the experience to herself, afraid of the consequences that speaking out might bring. In the 1950s and 60s, the entertainment industry was tightly controlled by powerful men and large studios that were more concerned with protecting reputations than addressing wrongdoing. Women who came forward with allegations of assault were often ignored, discredited, or punished. Careers could be destroyed overnight for being seen as too difficult or for challenging the wrong person. If Natalie was assaulted by Kirk Douglas, it would not have been an isolated incident in Hollywood at the time. In recent years, the industry has begun to confront a long history of abuse, exploitation, and silence. The #sign Me Too movement and investigations into figures like Harvey Weinstein have brought long-buried stories to the surface. But in Natalie's time, there were few, if any, avenues for justice. Many young women were advised, or even pressured, to stay quiet for the sake of their careers. It's impossible to know exactly how that experience shaped Natalie's future relationships and the choices she made in her personal life. But trauma researchers have long noted that early experiences of abuse can leave lasting psychological effects. These effects can influence how people form attachments, how they define safety, and how they respond to power dynamics. For Natalie, it's possible that her early experiences, both with her controlling mother and with men in positions of power, created a pattern of vulnerability that followed her into adulthood. Her marriages, especially to Robert Wagner, have often been described as passionate but complicated. Some who knew Natalie well have said she deeply loved Wagner and that she saw him as someone who understood the pressures of fame. Others have suggested that the relationship was shaped by control and emotional tension. It's likely that both perspectives hold some truth. Relationships are rarely simple, and for someone like Natalie, whose life was so closely tied to public perception, it's easy to see how personal boundaries could become blurred. What makes Natalie's story particularly complex is the contrast between public and private identity. To fans, she was radiant, elegant, and confident. But behind the scenes, she may have been carrying pain and fear that few understood. The fear of water, which had haunted her since childhood, was one of the most persistent symbols of her inner world. Her mother once told her that a psychic predicted she would die by drowning. Whether Natalie believed that prophecy or not, it was a story that stuck with her throughout her life. She often refused to go near water, avoided swimming, and never felt comfortable on boats. And yet, when she remarried Wagner in 1972, it was on a yacht, a detail that now seems strangely symbolic. It was a private ceremony, very different from their first wedding, and it appeared to mark a fresh start. But some friends and observers noted that the same issues from their earlier relationship began to return. Wagner was said to be protective of Natalie's time and social circle, and he reportedly became uncomfortable with her continued desire to act. There were even claims that he disliked her working with certain male co-stars. While none of this confirms abuse, it paints a picture of a relationship that may have been more emotionally turbulent than it appeared on the surface. In the years since Natalie's death, her daughter Natasha Gregson Wagner has become one of the most prominent voices in shaping her mother's legacy. In 2020, she produced an HBO documentary titled Natalie Wood: What Remains Behind. The film sought to humanize Natalie, showing her not just as a tragic figure, but as a mother, wife, and artist. Natasha also spoke about Robert Wagner, who helped raise her after her biological father left. She described him as a kind, attentive parent, someone who gave her a sense of stability during a very difficult time. But even Natasha has acknowledged the complexity of the situation. She has expressed her belief that her mother's death was an accident, but she also understands why others might continue to have doubts. She has said that reconciling the image of the man who helped raise her with the person of interest in her mother's death has been emotionally challenging. It's a conflict that mirrors what many people feel when trying to understand Natalie's life and the events surrounding her final night. This tension between personal loyalty and public suspicion, between image and reality, runs through the entire story. Some experts in relationship psychology point out that emotional abuse, control, and manipulation do not always look obvious from the outside. In fact, the people closest to a situation are sometimes the last to recognize the full extent of the harm being done. For Natalie, who grew up in an environment where control was normalized and silence was rewarded, it's possible she learned to adapt rather than confront the problems in her life head-on. Her decision to return to Wagner after their first divorce has been debated for decades. Some believe she still loved him. Others think she felt it was safer to go back to something familiar. There's even speculation that after years of failed relationships, she no longer believed true happiness was possible elsewhere. The motivations behind personal choices are always complicated, but understanding the pressures Natalie faced, both from the outside world and within herself, helps to make sense of why she may have returned to a situation that wasn't entirely healthy. The most haunting part of Natalie Wood's story is how so many questions remain unanswered. From the early abuse she allegedly suffered, to the night she died, to the inconsistent witness reports and delayed investigations, there is a pattern of silence, delay, and dismissal. These aren't just gaps in the timeline. They reflect a broader issue of how certain stories, especially those involving powerful individuals, are handled in public life. In revisiting Natalie's story, we're not just revisiting a cold case. We're examining how power, fear, and image have shaped the narratives of countless women in Hollywood and beyond. Her story sits at the intersection of fame, trauma, and truth. And even after more than 40 years, it continues to prompt serious questions about justice, accountability, and the cost of staying silent. Natalie Wood's legacy is complicated. She was a gifted actress, a loving mother, and a woman who wanted more than what life often allowed her. She lived in a world that demanded perfection, but offered little space for vulnerability. As new generations discover her work and her story, there is a chance to remember her not just for how she died, but for who she truly was. A person caught between the spotlight and the shadows, doing her best to survive in both.